Welcome to Autism Daily, everybody. Today's question is a similar one to one we've had before, maybe just going into a little bit more detail. So what steps can you take to get an autism diagnosis? So let's look at the steps you can take. So I think for the private parent versus the government parent, these are two very separate journeys. So let's start with the mommy or the daddy out there that kind of don't necessarily live in an area where they've got access to a lot of private medical professionals and or that require the help of the government system. So one of the first things we can do is contact an organization such as Autism South Africa. I know KZN has got Action for Autism. If you just pop onto the internet and you kind of go and have a look at autism associations in South Africa, there are a few. They assist families in assessing or in accessing assessment and diagnostic services by qualified professionals, which is absolutely wonderful. The second alternative is state hospitals. Many of the government hospitals have neurodevelopmental clinics, and they will be able to assist you with autism screening. And then for the private client, seeking diagnosis, you can contact your local pediatrician. We would personally recommend a neurodevelopmental pediatrician opposed to just a pediatrician, because that's ultimately what we want, is we want somebody that specializes in early childhood development and really looks at those developmental milestones. Not that pediatricians don't. I think it's more the neurological side that we are looking for. If the child is a little bit older, maybe the child's already kind of gone into the schooling sector, the child's now really battling in their early grades, or while they're going into maybe the intermediate phase around grade 4, then we can recommend contacting an educational psychologist. They would be able to do a proper educational assessment to actually see where the child is struggling. A good first step, and guys, usually the medical professionals refer to speech therapists and occupational therapists, but more often it's easier to get an appointment at a good speech therapist or at a good occupational therapist. So right in those early days where you kind of aren't sure what you're dealing with, you just think that there's a delay, you're not 100% sure, my recommendation is reach out to a speech therapist. If you are worried about your child's speech and language development, reach out to that speech therapist. That speech therapist is then going to be able to talk to you about audiology and about hearing tests. And there's a whole lot of things that we need to eliminate before we even go necessarily the route. You must remember, a developmental delay is not going to sort itself out. Getting intervention the minute you suspect the delay is what counts. There are going to be a few of them that, as the child grows older, things might get a little bit better, but don't rely just on time, because it's time you're never going to be able to get back. So when you suspect that delay, trust your gut. And I have said this in so many of these sessions, and I will keep saying it every single day. When in doubt, don't turn to social media. That's the worst thing that you can do, because we so often hear, oh, but my child started speaking at 5 and my child started speaking at 2. And that's true. There are children that only start speaking at 2. There's children, that start speaking at 2. Some only start speaking at 5. There's children that only start speaking at 7. But that doesn't mean that the child does not have an autism spectrum disorder. There are many, many, many children out there that are verbal that have autism spectrum disorder. And learning about it and understanding language and understanding receptive language and expressive language, and to what extent your child needs to be able to communicate. Being able to communicate isn't just talking. There's so much more to it, particularly also when we start looking at social communication and those sides. So I really hope that this has answered a few of your questions. and that you have a slightly clearer understanding of, what you can do if you do suspect that your child may have a developmental delay. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us, and I hope that we've answered your question. Have a good afternoon.